Duck hunting, duck shooting doesn't happen in the park down the road where you know the ducks that you see. It happens out in beautiful, pristine wetlands where hunters wading into streams that would otherwise be really clear. It stirs up the water, it affects all of the ecosystems, it takes the animals out of the ecosystems. Ducks are really important dispersers. They carry seeds from one wetland to another and help other species grow. There's a lot of flow-on effects that come from having ducks in the ecosystem and then not having ducks in the ecosystem too.
One for Mum, one for Dad, one for the country.
And there has never been a more exciting time to be an Australian.
Budgets are about choices, Fran, and you show what you value through the choices you make.
This is coal. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared. The Treasurer knows.
I want an economy that works for people, not the other way around.
We'll just end up being a third-rate economy, a banana republic.
Just follow the money.
G'day, and welcome to Follow the Money, the Australia Institute's podcast that explains big economic issues in plain English. I'm Ebony Bennett, Deputy Director at the Australia Institute, and you have probably heard us talk about the fight against native forest logging in Tasmania, against the Adani coal mine, or against fracking in the Northern Territory, or other environmental battles, including things like the battle to save Canberra's grassland earless dragon. But one long-standing environmental campaign you may not have heard of is the one against native duck hunting in Victoria and South Australia. But this is a fight that's been going on for a long time, and it's a fight the Australia Institute has been involved in for a long time.
Duck hunting season has opened despite continued calls for an end to the practice.
The government gave duck shooting the green light. Animal advocates have vowed to line the banks of the wetlands in protest.
Protesters far outnumbered hunters.
These are native animals that are protected under the Wildlife Act year-round until it comes to the duck shooting season, and we're blasting them out of the sky for fun.
We're looking at the environmental sustainability impacts as well as the social and economic impacts of duck hunting.
Between March and June, tens of thousands will be killed, and not all of them instantly.
They will probably suffer a slow, lingering death.
Victoria, South Australia and Tasmania are the only states where duck shooting is permitted.
A parliamentary inquiry has been established to probe its future after the Andrews government refused to ban the practice in full.
It's a practice that the majority of Victorians would like to see ended.
Now is the time, definitely, to stop duck hunting and in fact ban it once and for all.
You might be thinking, how many people even hunt ducks? Well, we're here to tell you all about it and to dive into the world of duck hunting. So to unpack all of this, I'm talking to Rod Campbell, Research Director at the Australia Institute, Liz Morrison, a researcher here at the Australia Institute, and Noah Schultz-Bayard, Director of our South Australian branch. G'day, Rod, Noah and Liz. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, Eb.
Oh, thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Rod, I want to start with you because I know this is an issue that the Australia Institute has worked on over a long period of time. Tell us about the issue of duck hunting and why the Australia Institute has gotten involved in this issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people are probably familiar with, certainly in Victoria, every year seeing pictures of bloody, dying birds flapping around as people rescue them from being shot at. And it was actually in 2012, it was one of the first things I did for the Australia Institute. We wrote a report with the RSPCA on the economics of duck hunting in Victoria, because there's widespread claims amongst hunting proponents that the hunting of ducks is somehow good for the Victorian economy. So in 2012, we wrote a report called Out for a Duck. Boom, boom.
Won't be the last of the duck puns today, I'm
sure. That concluded that the economic impact of a ban on duck hunting in Victoria would be absolutely minimal. In fact, probably it would be economically beneficial, mainly because very, very few people go duck hunting. I think the numbers at the moment are about 11,000 in the entire state. That's a state of 6.5 million people. I can't work out what percentage that is immediately, but it's really small. Not very many people go duck hunting, but a large majority of Victorians care about their ducks and don't like seeing them being blown to smithereens, as Daffy might say. And on that basis, ending duck hunting would probably be beneficial economically. Whether or not economics is the right way to look at this is probably another question.
Yeah, I was gonna ask that, Rod, because as you said, we've been involved in looking at the economics of this issue for a while. Do people who love duck hunting, the pro-duck hunting people, is that one of their arguments that we can't ban it because it's good for the economy?
Oh, absolutely. And interestingly, we put out, the Australia Institute put out our report Out for a Duck in 2012, and amazingly in 2013, the relevant department of the Victorian government commissioned its own economic research that suddenly said the economic contribution of duck hunting, and I use the word contribution kind of advisedly, it's a bit of a weasel word there, was big, and they produced a similar study in 2020. So the idea that hunting in general, not necessarily duck hunting in particular, the idea that its economic impact or economic contribution is big is widespread amongst hunting advocates for sure. And I guess it was probably most famously used by Bridget McKenzie when she was the sport minister. Remember the whole sports rorts thing? Well, but before the sports rorts downfall, Bridget McKenzie was the sport minister, and she commissioned the same economists who'd done the 2013 Victorian study to write a study on the economic and social impact of hunting in Australia. And what do you know? It turned out that, according to them, it's fabulous and is a mainstay of regional economies and contributes enormously to the health and well-being of hunters and communities, and looks absolutely fabulous.
G'day guys, welcome back to our YouTube channel. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. It really helps us in our endeavour to save duck hunting. Did you know that currently the South Australian government is reviewing native bird hunting? This review could have dire consequences for us as hunters. It could be the end of duck and stubble quail hunting in South Australia. And it could also spell the end in other states, because as every state falls, there's more pressure on the next to also ban it.
Noah, I want to come to you next, because this is also a big issue in South Australia. Why is that?
Well, in the lead up to both the 2018 and 2022 state elections here in South Australia, the SA Labor Party went to those elections with a policy of having a review of duck hunting in the state should they win. So after they did win in 2022, they announced at the beginning of this year, in 2023, that to coincide with the opening of the duck hunting season, which was in March, they were going to launch a parliamentary inquiry looking at the sport, its impact on communities, its economic impact, animal welfare issues. And that was announced by the Deputy Premier, who is also the Minister for Environment in South Australia, Dr. Susan Close. That inquiry is underway right now. It's a Legislative Council Select Committee inquiry. And the Australia Institute made a submission to that inquiry where we commissioned a special survey, statewide survey, asking South Australians, first of all, did they know that duck hunting is legal in South Australia? Do they do it? How do they feel about it? Do they want it banned? And a very strong result, 3 out of 4 South Australians, 76% of respondents actually want to see the sport banned. So really, it's a sport that's done by very few people. 2% of South Australians said that they had been duck hunting and would do so again. So a very small number of people that engage in the sport, but very strong opposition amongst the population to it and support for a ban.
Rod, if people aren't allowed to hunt native ducks, just going back to the economics of it, whether you're in South Australia or Victoria, are the economics the same? How big of an impact will this have on the South Australian and Victorian economies if there's a ban on native duck hunting?
Yeah, near zero, because including in the survey that Noah just talked about and a survey we did in 2012, we asked duck hunters, what would you do if you couldn't go duck hunting? And abundantly they say they would go fishing or camping or shoot rabbits or shoot something else. Almost exactly the same activity in almost exactly the same places, just without dead ducks. I mean, plenty of other things could die, but ducks would not. So that's the crux of it from an economic perspective. There's really, the economics-y word is substitution. There's heaps of substitute activities for duck hunting, and duck hunters specifically say that they engage in them. They'd still spend their money on outdoor activities in regional Victoria and South Australia, doing almost exactly the same thing. So anyone who sort of says that, there'd be a big impact if we banned duck hunting, what they're sort of implying, and some of the studies actually do this, they don't state it like this, but the assumption is that any money that was spent on duck hunting would be withdrawn out of ATMs and blasted with the shotguns until those $50 notes couldn't be used anymore, which is obviously ridiculous. Like, people use the same amount of money to do something else in the real world, and economic models relied on by hunting advocates that suggest there'd be a serious economic impact from changes to hunting regulations rely on this ridiculous assumption of people destroying their own money.
Liz, I want to come to you next. We've talked about the economics of duck hunting, but I want to talk about, I guess...
It's the non-economics of duck hunting.
the lack of an economic case for duck hunting. But obviously this has a huge impact, not the least on ducks themselves. What are the environmental effects of duck hunting?
Yeah, so duck sport shooting is obviously bad for ducks, very bad for ducks, but it's also bad for the broader environments that they exist in. So the Victorian Annual Survey of Game Ducks showed that the population of all game duck species on average across the state declined 17% from 2021 to 2022. And in South Australia, the Waterbird report from the Department of Environment and Water found that species abundance was the second lowest on record in 20 years, and that population sizes were just 19% of the long-term average. Obviously, not all of this can be attributed to sport shooting, but the populations aren't doing well, and sport shooting can only make matters worse. Big estimations of the number of animals that are killed every year from the RSPCA said that 90,000 birds would be killed in Victoria and up to 35,000 would be wounded. And in South Australia, that was 40,000 birds would be shot and killed and 10,000 more wounded. The ones that are wounded, if they don't die later of the shot wounds, they'll die of things like starvation, exposure, infection, lots of really awful ways to die, which is obviously bad for the ducks, but more broadly, duck hunting, duck shooting doesn't happen in the park down the road where the ducks that you see. It happens out in beautiful, pristine wetlands where hunters wading into streams that would otherwise be really clear. It stirs up the water. It affects all of the ecosystems. It takes the animals out of the ecosystems. Ducks are really important dispersers. They carry seeds from one wetland to another and help other species grow. There's a lot of flow-on effects that come from having ducks in the ecosystem and then not having ducks in the ecosystem too.
Yeah, and as we've been talking about, these are native ducks as well. It's not quite the same as, you might, be a pacifist, but I'm not really opposed to people shooting rabbits and other pest species. But that's absolutely not what we're talking about here. It's native ducks.
Absolutely. And two of the game species in Victoria have actually been put on the threatened species list recently, the hardhead duck and the blue-winged shoveler, which were game species and are now listed as threatened.
Wow, so that's a big impact on those species.
Absolutely.
Then. And is it a problem for kind of other birds? Do they get caught in the crossfire, so to speak?
Yeah, well, a lot of people are really familiar with bycatch. So, you go fishing and you accidentally catch a turtle or a dolphin. Similar things happen with duck
Do
duck
you?
shooting.
I've never gone fishing and accidentally caught a dolphin. You must do some serious fishing, Liz.
Oh, not me. I would never. But, we're familiar with that idea, but actually it's kind of hard to identify a bird at a distance. Often you'll be out in a park and you'll look up and something flies overhead and it's really quick. You can't tell immediately what it is. it's hard to identify the birds. I actually, just before jumping on the podcast, I was digging around the websites for regulating duck hunting in Victoria and South Australia, and I did the practice test for the bird identification test that you have to do to qualify to get your shooting license. And they did show videos. They did show videos of the birds flying over the water, but they were unobstructed videos. Nothing was in the way, which is unlikely. And they were really zoomed in as well.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm sure they've got access to binoculars and things, but I think identifying a bird on a practice test online is very different to doing it in real life.
So are you going to go the whole hog and register to become a duck hunter, Liz?
Oh, look, I think it would be uneconomic and unpopular to do that.
Animal activists are appalled the hunt is going ahead, but hunters are equally unimpressed it's been restricted.
This season is shorter and with strict bag limits.
Last year, more than 260,000 ducks were killed during the season.
The committee will be looking at issues around animal welfare, sustainability, community attitudes, economic considerations and also Aboriginal perspective.
More species have been added to the list of protected birds.
We'll be fighting the issue as hard as we ever have. The violence and the cruelty that those birds have to go through every year is totally unacceptable.
Rod and Noah, I want to come back to you. Obviously, this is a live issue still in South Australia and Victoria. Rod, to Victoria first. What are the prospects of a native duck hunting ban as we speak in Victoria?
Yeah, so much like South Australia, there's a parliamentary inquiry going on. Liz and I gave evidence to that inquiry a couple of weeks ago. And look, I think it's really up for grabs what will come out of the inquiry. I think certainly some members of the inquiry are absolutely on side and realise that it's time to end duck hunting in Victoria, but there were certainly some members of the committee who didn't share that view, and it got pretty fiery in the hearings. So it's a red hot political issue down here.
And Noah, coming to South Australia, it's, as you said, been a promise before the election and been an issue for a bit longer than that. What are the prospects of a ban in South Australia?
It's a similar situation to Victoria, strongly held opinions on both sides. And there hasn't been a legislative test through the parliament, but I wouldn't be surprised if it did come to that the numbers would be very close in the Legislative Council. What I think's interesting is that both Victoria and South Australia are looking at this now. A bunch of other states have gone ahead and banned the hunting of native birds. New South Wales, Queensland, WA, they've all done it. So there's a fair bit of attention being put on South Australia and Victoria as they go through these inquiries. And I think it's fair to say if one of these states moves to ban duck hunting, native bird hunting, it will apply even more pressure to the other state, being the only remaining mainland state that allows this practice to go on. So to me, that it feels like there's a bit of a sense of inevitability around it. Many other states have moved already. It's a question of when South Australia and Victoria want to catch up to the pack and ban duck hunting themselves.
To the flock, Noah, to the flock.
That's right, catch up to the flock. And ban hunting, but there is strong opposition. There's strongly held opinions, and if someone did a survey and found out that 76% of South Australians found what I do on the weekend abhorrent and wanted to ban it, I'd probably get pretty defensive myself. I might get so defensive as to commission some dodgy economic modelling that makes it look like my real hobby is supporting regional communities, where in actual fact I just like shooting birds. So it's a hotly contested issue. Once one of these states makes the switch, I wouldn't be surprised if the other follows suit.
Indeed, a hot button issue, and I must say I felt like we were going to get a lot more of our duck puns in this little podcast. We've had a few out for a duck, but I feel like we haven't brought our A game for the listeners here on the duck puns from Australia Institute research. A lot of our reports and submissions.
Sake, Rod, I thought this was going to be your department.
Yeah, Rod, we were counting on you, and you've let the team down, you've let yourself down, and you've let the listeners down.
I've quailed you all. And one thing we haven't talked about is these parliamentary inquiries are also looking into quail shooting, which is also a thing. So, yeah, having quailed on the pun front, we've also failed to mention one of these other important species.
But if you do want to know all the best duck puns, head on over to australiainstitute.org.au for all our research and submissions since 2012, was it, Rod?
2012, yeah.
2012, and they're all there. That's all we've got time for today. This episode was recorded on Tuesday the 6th of June 2023, and things may have changed since recording. If you liked today's episode, please rate and review us. It helps other people to find the show. And if you love Follow the Money and want to help us to continue to do work with impact, please consider supporting us with a small tax-deductible donation at australiainstitute.org.au today. You can visit australiainstitute.org.au for all our latest research and content, including all our wonderfully titled duck punny submissions and research on duck hunting. And we're on Twitter at the Oz Institute with an AUS. My Twitter handle is ebony_Bennett with a NNT. Rod is at R_O_D_C. Liz is at Morrison_Liz. That's Morrison with one R and one S. And Noah is at Noah_S Bayard. Our producer is Jennifer Macy. You can find her at Jennifer Macy, with additional editing by Emily Perkins. Our theme music is by Jonathan McFeet from Pulse and Thrum, with additional music from Blue Dot Sessions. Thanks for listening.